Science communication comes in all mediums, from filmmaking to journalism and even Dungeons and Dragons, and Shamini Bundell does it all. Shamini is an award-winning filmmaker, a writer and a journalist, working on Nature's YouTube channel, podcast and magazine online. She is also one of the members of RPGeeks, combining Dungeons and Dragons with science. Join us as we speak about Shamini's journey through science and science media production, her introduction to Dungeons and Dragons, and combining her broad skill set to both science communication and the creative arts. I'm Michelle Ong, and this is Steam Powered. Good morning, Shamini. Thank you so much for joining me today on Steam Powered. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you about your amazing journey.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So you are many things in several spaces, which I love because you are you're applying your writing, directing, performing skill sets in science, filmmaking, and tabletop and theatre, like totally maxing out all of those points right there.
Too many things. Indeed, yes, correct.
Indeed. Yeah, so you're currently doing some really awesome things with making science films with nature and other communication stuff, but you started off in zoology. So why zoology?
So undergrad was basically zoology. It was technically natural sciences. And I'd grown up on the David Attenborough films. You know, my dad loves all that kind of stuff, loves nature and wildlife. So I definitely assumed I'd go into that kind of thing. Maybe I was pretty into evolution. But actually, when it came to choosing my third year modules, they ended up being really strongly paleontology. So there were a couple of tetrapod evolution ones, which just ended up being a huge amount of detail about early tetrapods, four-legged creatures coming onto land, and which ones are Tiktaalik and Acanthostega, and I did get really into that. I mean, I've always been into dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are cool, but a lot more paleontology than I'd thought. It was just whatever was interesting at the time. Really, that's how I kind of chose my modules. What I kind of fancied doing.
Yeah. So, how did you go from that to science media production? What prompted that change?
This whole field of science communication, it's a thing. I didn't know it was did you know it was a thing?
I just thought that kind of came as part of the job. At some point people are going to ask you to talk about it and it just comes naturally.
Yeah, it's its whole own thing, its whole separate thing. And there's science communication that you do as a working scientist, and then there's just science communication that you just I'm not even going to do the science. I'm just going to do the science communication. Other than being should I go be a wildlife filmmaker, which was definitely a thought, but not a very realistic thought, I feel. I had a camcorder, and sometimes I used to crawl over the grass trying to film rabbits and be I'm a filmmaker. But I was no, that's not what real, I have no idea how you would do that. That's not what real people do for jobs. So I was just looking for masters and PhDs after I did my undergrad. I was right, one does a PhD, that's what one does. Okay, fine, I'll go look for one. I was I don't know what PhD to do. I'll do a master's first and get into it. So I was looking up sort of evolutionary behaviour and just sort of general evolution sort of style masters. And I just came across this master's at Imperial, which was science communication or science media production. And I was that's a thing you can learn academically? What? Could I have those skills? That applies to me. I can do that. And academia is something I'm very familiar with. So if someone said, go out and get a job, here's how you do it, I'd be no, don't have to do that. But a master's course, I'm yes. Would you like me to write essays and get high grades? Because this is what I've been practicing for. And that was the way into hey, did you know there's a whole world of things you can do with a science degree that aren't either academia or industry? And it sort of opened it up, and filmmaking was the one that I was sort of focusing on and that I ended up going into mostly.
So, what drew you in particular to the filmmaking side of science communication?
When I was little, my mum had a department camera. So it was very exciting. It was kind of we would never have bought a family camcorder at that point because it was quite early days, but she had this camcorder that was borrowed from work that I used, and we would make films. And this is where like the writing and the theatre, that is one of my hobbies, as you mentioned earlier. And it all sorts of ties together because I wrote a script for a murder mystery and then made my friends film the murder mystery. And we all had different characters and it was about the acting, but I wanted to film it. And that was with zero editing. That was filming it on the camera in order with very dodgy scene cuts, because every time you press record on the camera, it would just go back a fraction of a second. So you had to leave a fraction of a second onto the end of your scene, but not too long, otherwise it'd be a really weird pause. So I'd been doing ridiculous stuff. And then I got a camcorder for my 21st birthday and I filmed all sorts of stuff, made little music videos of our friends hanging about. We made silly, very silly films, as you can imagine, spoofs of things. And it really was this like messing around and then getting like the basic editing skills that I never in a million years thought would ever be relevant, let alone like my profession now is mostly video editing. It was just a silly hobby. And I was going to say kids these days. I'm like, oh no, I'm sounding really old. But like, yeah, but genuinely, kids these days are growing up with so much more.
Back then, we had to edit through the snow and sleet.
Yeah, exactly. Down lines, 8 hours a day, exactly. But no, you have the access these days and people do that as not necessarily as a hobby, but if you're there like making TikToks or even just sort of for Instagram, like that kind of media is a lot more normal to just have a go at doing and leading up to developing skills that, yeah, for me, I'm like, oh yeah, that's my job now.
It's just such a really cool progression because, yeah, it was part of the thing that you used to do as a hobby. It was like, yeah, let's incorporate that into making a living out of it.
Yeah.
It's very neat. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of people really would love that kind of journey for themselves.
I mean, it's lucky, yeah. To be able to do that and to be able to do things you enjoy is lucky anyway, let alone sort of combine different things. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, you know, you're making all these very, very cool videos for nature on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I love all of the kind of topics that you're able to touch on. Like, it's a wide range. It's not like you're kind of pinned to any particular topic. And, you know, just recently you did one called The Sandcastle Economy.
Yeah, Sandcastle film. I just like that I get to make films about sandcastles. It's great.
I know. And while you're building all those sandcastles, you're talking about all this very cool, important stuff as well, because I guess for me personally, I've been noticing a lot more coverage about the sand crisis and, you know, Singapore's sand imports for land reclamation and sand mafias and all the ecological impact of that.
Yeah.
So like, that's a really cool topic. So, you know, how do you decide what sort of topics you're going to be creating for the channel?
Yeah, well, so we're pretty lucky at Nature. So Nature's obviously a big sort of broad scientific journal that covers a lot of, like, not everything, but it does cover a lot of areas of science. So generally what we do is look at papers that are like due to be published, and being sort of internal, we kind of get access and then can pick and choose. And like there are just papers that come out that either they have the sort of supplementary information videos with them anyway that have been provided, or you just read the research topic and you're like, I bet someone filmed that, either because it's about slow motion footage giving you the insights into what's going on, or whoever was in the lab that day, surely they'd have filmed it because it's cool. So yeah, so it's great. So we just get our pick. It's a very, nice. You know, it's a very, nice position to be in within Nature. We've got this little sort of multimedia team and we can just choose what films we want to cover. But also, you know, we want to we've got other priorities, right? We want to create a balance. Let's not only cover the papers about the robots, even though YouTube loves the films about the robots. There's a limit, right? Let's have some biology, let's have some physics, let's try and, you know, there are topics that are harder to cover in video. So if we get a cell paper with cool video of cells where you can see what's going on, let's like take the opportunity to cover that field. If we have money, let's take the opportunity to do an animation and do something weird that you wouldn't otherwise be able to, I don't know, particle physics or something that don't really film that well. The footage not so great enough when it comes to the particle physics. So yeah, that kind of thing informs our choices.
That is very cool. You know, I love that kind of idea of the creative process behind making all of these things, because a lot of science doesn't film very well. So, being able to come up with ways of making that work and
gotta be creative.
Convey.
Yes.
Yeah, you gotta be creative about the way that
Absolutely.
you convey that information. It's very neat.
Which is really fun. And in film, there are loads of options. So like this Sandcastle film wasn't initially about sand. It was supposed to be about this sort of whole concept of the circular economy, which wasn't something I was familiar with. And I was like, this sounds very dry. It's sort of like, how can we go beyond recycling and make everything that we use part of this sort of circular system where it doesn't go to waste at a landfill at the end of its use, but it's constantly being sort of cycled through. And I was like, yeah, I mean, that's really important, but
we kind of hashed that to death a bit.
Yeah, and how do you highlight that it's, everyone's like, recycling, that's just a glamorous topic, how do you kind of zhuzh it up a bit? And, the sand crisis is sort of loosely related in that the circular economy is something that you can use to preserve sand, to have less sand waste, that's sort of needing less sand. And sand is used in the construction industry, and that led to the idea of like, okay, well, let's hire an artist to build a sand sculpture of a city. This film is like, you've got your experts going, hey, the circular economy is really important when we're building things, here's what we can do. But the visuals, what you're seeing is a sculptor creating a sort of skyscraper out of sand, and then it being sort of knocked down at the end and reused again, and the sort of metaphor for reuse and recycling. And that was we were lucky to have the budget to be able to afford an artist properly. But yeah, it's really nice to be able to film something that isn't the obvious and that can be more creative and visual and interesting.
Absolutely. And yeah, as you said, recycling, there's only so much you can take with it. And this is a unique angle of being able to demonstrate, look, this is other stuff that doesn't get easily recycled, and all the kind of stuff about materials and the way that, we can kind of close the loop on a lot of these things. It's cool being able to see all these other things being kind of cycled back through into the system. But it's not something that you think about normally, because you go, building, that's it. You tear it down, done. Yeah. So being able to give that perspective and illustrating that with the sandcastles was novel. I really did enjoy that.
Yeah, being able to make different things out of sand rather than filming like a building site and some demolition and a train. It's just like, we're just going to build all those out of sand. But that's the visuals. They're talking about it. You're seeing it. You're just seeing the sand version. So it ties the whole film together thematically as well. You've got this sort of visual through line that's quite nice and sort of consistent. Sand everywhere.
Yeah, and such a great use of your skill set, being able to create all of these sorts of aspects and pull them all together. It's nice. So with all these videos, you get to pick and choose your projects. Are you kind of building them in parallel with other projects at the same time because of how long it takes to make them? Or is it usually kind of serial?
Well, they're supposed to be sort of overlapping slightly. I feel like I'm not the most efficient, because if I get into one, I get really caught up in it. And my boss is like, hey, that other one's coming up. And I'm like, I'll do it next week. And then I sort of leave it till the last minute. And I'm like, oh no, I'm going to do that. Oh, make a film. But yeah, there's some degree of overlap. And occasionally you get a few that are really big, long projects, like animation takes a while. Yeah. So that's going to be several months. And in the meantime, while you're kind of waiting for that, sometimes you've got like, this is coming out next week. We've got all the footage already. All you got to do is like, read it, write a script, understand it, edit it together, like 2-minute film, go. And I'm like, yeah, I can fit that in. Super, super fast edit. So yeah, little bits of overlap.
So how do you tell, like, how can you gauge how long you have to create the video? Like whether it's going to be a 2-minute or a 10-minute, or, where do you stop digging?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question that I've been wondering about a lot at work anyway, because I started at Nature, I want to say 8 years ago. Was it? Some time ago.
It's been a while.
A little while. And at that point, I was very interested in videos for social media as well. And I don't know if you remember, there was this whole like Facebook pivot to video nonsense where Facebook were massively pushing like Facebook video. Their stats weren't really comparable with anyone else's stats, so they just made it look better. But the point is that they were genuinely, their algorithm was pushing the video in front of people. Whether people were watching or not was another question. But they were very keen on it. So I was kind of like, yeah, social media is where a whole different audience is off YouTube. Let's make things that can work there as well. And that was very, very pushing short form. So we would do, I would say our standard was a 3-minute video. We would do a voiceover. We'd have enough sort of footage to fill 3 minutes with a bit of repetition. Maybe you'd have to buy a bit of stock footage to illustrate it. 3-minute video. Boom, done. Neat little science explanation. That has gotten our average has gotten notably longer over the years. We still sometimes do 2 or 3 minute really snappy quick videos, but various things have changed. YouTube is definitely favoring longer videos. I think people are more interested. It's it's not just the algorithm, it's responding to what the audience wants. People are more interested in longer form videos. Like the things people are watching are like really longer form, like 15, 30 plus minutes, which we don't do. Our averages are going up to 6 or 7, and then we'll more often do like a 10 or 12 minute video, which when I started would have been like, oh my gosh, who's got time for that? Whereas now it's like, yeah, if the story justifies it, if it keeps your attention, it really should be about the story to some extent, about like how much, there is to say while sort of keeping the pacing. Because some stories are really short and snappy, or at least like the level that you want to tell it at is short and snappy. And it gets to a point where you're like, oh, well, if we were to start digging deeper into X, we'd have to make it twice as long and have a whole section about X topic, which we don't have the footage for. So, right, let's leave that. Whereas other things, let's let this interviewee talk about some topic. And the other thing that's changed is that post-pandemic, we're much more likely to include Zoom interviews or video calls like this in our films because
it's normal now.
It is normal. Yeah, I mean, it is normal. I was going to say, like, people tend to have like slightly nicer kit as well, although not all scientists that interview have terribly nice setups. But they are used to doing it. People are used to seeing it. If we put out a film and instead of like a perfectly like shot sit down interview with like lights and camera, it's just like, hi, I'm clearly on a slightly dodgy video call. Like, people aren't going to be like, this is so unprofessional. What quality of footage are you putting in your film? People are like, oh yeah, video calls, pandemic happened. So, which also enables you to make a film longer, right? Because now you've got someone talking to you. You can see their face while talking. You don't have to cover it all with footage because it's just a voiceover. Like you can watch them. They can sort of give more sort of interesting little insights.
Yeah. That's a very cool perspective about that because, yeah, it's true. Like, people are a bit more forgiving of a lack of polish in some of this content just because they're used to the fact that we've had to make do with video calls. That's cool. I like that. That's a very interesting bit of insight.
Oh, my secrets. Giving away the secrets.
Oh, no. Keep it away. Anyone can do what you do now.
I hope they do. Yes. I mean, they can, though. Like, just get your smartphone out and some free video editing software and like learn those skills because they can do it.
So accessible now. But yeah, so moving on to a different type of storytelling, let's talk about D&D.
We should always talk about D&D. This is, yeah, you think this is a science show. I'm just here to, under the radar, convert all your audience into actually mega D&D fans. That's my real aim.
Your secret plan. And speaking of that conversion, because I saw on your bio where you said you discovered D&D while drunk at a bus stop, and I would really love to know more.
Where did I write that? Yeah, no, that's absolutely, it was great. So D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, for anyone who isn't aware, it's a tabletop role-playing game. It involves some dice. So, it's what the kids play on Stranger Things, typically very fantasy-themed, and involves a lot of role-playing. So unsurprisingly, I came to it through drama and theatre. That was my main staple hobby for years and years and years since school, was like doing plays and musicals. Love that. So the night of the Drunken bus stop D&D was the after show party for a pantomime that I'd written. You guys know what panto is, right? Like, 'cause it feels very British and I'm always like, does anyone know what I'm talking about?
Well, we are kind of in a colony, but I don't know about the rest of the world.
That's true. That's true. Do you guys have pantos?
Yes. So one of my guests was actually one of founding members of the Panto Society in one of the universities here. So yes, we do have panto. I don't know how widespread it is, but it does exist.
That's awesome. Oh man. Yeah. Because I always thought, like, in America and stuff, they're usually a bit like, oh, weird, this weird thing. Ah, awesome. Yeah, love a panto. Yeah, it's great. And these are really musical, highly musical ones as well. So get some musical theatre in there, lots of singing and dancing. But after a party, I've written it and directed it. A bunch of the cast are there. And everyone's starting to go home from the pub. And we're like, no, what? The party's not over. We need more party. At which point was he the prince? Or the yeah, it was kind of the prince, the queen's brother.
Yeah,
anyway,
still a prince.
Yeah, it was the prince. He was the it's a sub prince of not the main prince. Was like, hey guys, come back to my house and play D&D. And I was like, what? Okay, I'm sure. Okay, but I don't want to like get the night bus, go back to your house, sit down, start playing a game. Like, can we start now on the way to the bus stop? Can we just go? He's like, yeah. Right. So he had like on his phone, like a dice roller on his phone, and you press it and you see the little animation of the dice go. And he was like, right, you're all the characters you are your characters from the panto.
Pre-rolled characters, nice.
Yeah. One of the narrators was there. The huntsman was there. One like ensemble member had played a frog in one scene. It's like, yeah, you're a frog now. That's your character. And I was the director. So I didn't have a character. So I was like, my name's Di, the director. And I'm just a little hobbit with a frying pan, you know, in top Lord of the Rings fashion.
Yeah.
And it was great. And it was just very, very silly and exciting. And we started a sort of ongoing game out of that, where we would all get together and playing those same characters. One of those characters still exists in a sort of different campaign that's ongoing even now.
That's awesome.
I believe. And that's how I discovered the fun. Yeah.
Bus Stop Live Improv D&D. That's great.
Exactly. And it is, again, it's one of these things where I'm like, oh, this is all of my interests and skills. It's got the improv, it's got the acting, it's kind of got the writing as well, because you're kind of like, you're all telling the story together. I was like, this is great. And then the dressing up. I've gotten quite into dressing up recently.
That's
like,
important.
wow, I get to dress up for this and like be my character. And I bought wigs and everything over lockdown. People got some weird interests over hobbies, and mine was sort of cosplay. I have a lot of wigs now. It's great. Would recommend.
That's awesome. Well, it's not a leaf.
No, it's not. It's not. Yeah, but yeah, enjoying that.
Absolutely. And you got super into D&D because obviously reasons, but why start streaming your sessions and making them educational? Like, where did that come in?
I think educational. Oh no, we don't really use the word educational. Now I'm like, oh, educational, but like in a cool way. No, education is cool. Education is cool, kids. Yeah, so I got into these various like tabletop role-playing games. It's not just D&D, but various things. And then I'd be like running them for different people and in different games. And I did some at work, like after work, we would stay on for a few hours. Like I'd find a little meeting room and do one shots. So that's just would be like a one-parter sort of standalone story of an evening. And a guy who was working with us at the time, Ali Jennings, came to me and was like, Shamini, we need to do science D&D. And I'm like, what do we? Why? What? Okay. And he was just like, yeah, no, this is a thing. We weren't really sure how that would work or whether that would work. I think I was pretty skeptical at the start, but Ali really pushed it. I was like, who's going to do it? Who's going to like DM these stories that involve science? And Ali's like, I will. This is from like playing D&D for the first time the other day. And I'm like, okay, great.
Bold. I like it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And he's so good. And I'm like, damn, how are you so good? But we got a group together. We're all basically science filmmakers. So my friend Emily Bates, I also met doing musicals. She was in that show, actually, as well. She wasn't playing Drunken D&D at Bus Stop with us, but she was also in that show. So I've done lots of acting with her before, and she's also a science filmmaker working in sort of TV and for New Scientist and things like that. And then Ali knew this guy called Simon Clark, Dr. Simon Clark, who's a YouTuber. And he has like this whole YouTube channel where, again, like long form stuff. And he's also done Twitch streaming. And it all sort of came together with the sort of relevant skills and everything. And we sort of designed a format for playing a game and talking about the science that came up in the game, we skin it as sci-fi, which makes it slightly easier. So rather than fantasy setting, and then everything that we do, so in D&D you have rules of like, I cast sleep on you, and this species has excellent night vision, dark vision. And so we were like, at the beginning of every episode or every other sort of section, someone will do a little explanation of like, if you wanted to cast sleep in real life or like in this sci-fi world, how does that work? Like, what are you doing? Are you manipulating their brain waves? Is it some kind of drug? Go in, do some research and like bring us back some fun facts. Or the same with dark vision, like, okay, what creatures have adapted to see in the dark? How could we use that in our world to explain how it works?
Yep, that's awesome. No, I like that. The funny things that occasionally when I'll be watching stuff with my husband, I'll kind of say, can we pause for a sec? I want to talk about this for a moment. He hates it so much.
How does this work with the science?
Well, the most recent thing, we were watching Keanu Reeves' 47 Ronin, and it's based on a Japanese story about 47 samurai who have to go avenge their lord. But that film, Japan, had demons and witches and magic and stuff like that. And there was one main witch there who was using her magic for deception and, meddling with people's heads, making them do stupid things.
Oh, nice.
I said to him, can we hit pause for a sec? I really need to talk about this. Could Japan have developed that culture of honor and dishonor and that strong thing about the way that trust is developed when you've got this massively overpowered magic where you can manipulate people's minds and make them do things? How do you have an honor-based culture when you can't trust what's going on?
Or alternatively, you could create an alternate history for a culture where that's why it's so important, because, you can't actually trust even your own mind. So all you have is that sense of duty, and like that's all you sort of can rely on. Yeah, and it's really interesting it's really nice building like worlds like that where, the important thing is they have their own consistent rules. This is sort of classic sci-fi fantasy world building, but, let's think about a world where you have this magic, that certain people have this magic. What does that lead to? What are the norms now in that world that's different from ours? It's really interesting.
It's the fun part. This is the fun part of world building. So, how do you like DMing?
DMing? Yeah, DMing's all right. I'm not very good at it yet. I'm working on it. I feel like, on the one hand, anyone can do it. Like, I DM one-shots all the time. And especially when it's like people who haven't played before, I think they have a great time, and I can facilitate that great time and be part of it. So that's really enjoyable. But I'm not like, I can't do it to exactly how I want it. I'm like, no, I need to get better at this so I can really sort of like craft and tell the stories I want with the players and enable them to have those great moments. So yeah, I tend to do one-shots, and I'm running one campaign, and it's really getting away from me. They haven't even got to the instigating event of the main like second part of the plot yet, because things keep happening and I'm like, oh. So, I'm developing my skills of like having no control over what's happening and not pushing it forward very well, and trying to figure out what I like.
Herding cats.
yeah, but like I could herd strictly, but there is a balance between like, railroading the story to go exactly where you want and like having complete freedom for the characters to like discover and create their own story. So still working out the balance here.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I know that our friend who used to DM for us a lot struggled with that greatly because he would just hair off and he would just go, no, for the love of God, I've planned this really well. Can you just...
The plot!
Yes. Can you just please follow my plot? I just want to get to the next section.
Yeah.
It's challenging.
It's really interesting skills. Yeah. I do really enjoy playing, especially in long campaigns, and just being responsible for just like my section of the story of like what my sort of character's arc and journey is, things like that, and relationships.
Absolutely. Well, it's fun. Like, no matter what capacity is, it's always going to be fun. And, rewinding back a bit, because you do try to work science into your campaigns for the sciencey bit, do you feel you have to modify the way you play it out to have the stuff, or do you just run with it and the science will come.
It definitely is in our mind, because our rule is anything that you do, you have to explain using science, or you have to be able to vaguely, plausibly explain. So when we are picking things, I think we did do one episode on this, we tend to avoid teleportation spells because we're just like, oh no, what is this? Is this just faster than light travel? Is it a wormhole? How does Misty Step work? What do you mean you dimension door over there? Oh god. So I feel like there's sort of cheating of if something's hard, it's I'm going to not pick that and then I won't have to explain it.
Yes.
And I definitely pick things that fit in with the vibe of your character. So you might be an ice witch and then you only pick cold themed spells or whatever. So I pick spells that could plausibly be explained by some sort of telepathic manipulation, because that's my character's thing, is that there's this sort of colony of microorganisms. I was very sort of slime mold inspired, where they're kind of individual cells, but they're also sort of part of a larger macroorganism. And these organisms, I sort of say, okay, these organisms are floating everywhere in the air and they have sort of electromagnetic charges and they can sort of manipulate the electromagnetic field to some extent. Maybe they could act sort of like an ECG, sort of both from sort of just externally, both reading out and also potentially manipulating brain waves from the surface. So then I'm okay, right, so what spells shall I pick? So something like Phantasmal Force, a spell that makes the other person have a vision of something. I'm right, that's clearly a sort of psychic-y themed thing. So yeah, it does sort of influence it in that way.
That is very cool. I do like that. That works really, really well.
It's nice and creepy. So she's an aberrant mind sorcerer and it's all creepy psychic stuff. And I quite like, because, I've taken detect thoughts, where you can read people's minds and things, you can influence them. And those kind of, it's very morally problematic in D&D, all of these sort of mind control things. Because in D&D, you generally play good guys. It's hi, we're the heroes. But sometimes you have these spells and you're I really just, getting into your head and manipulating your brain so that you like me or so that you want to do something, that's not cool, heroes. That's not a good guy behavior. So I quite I've sort of built a character where it's not sort of portrayed as a sort of good and heroic thing. She doesn't like these powers, but people want her to use them and she ends up using them, and she can't get away from this this superorganism that she's kind of part of, and if she doesn't kind of release the energy of the magic, it sort of builds up and then sort of releases by itself. So I just kind of tied it all in there with the sort of creepy psychic vibes.
That's such a good way of crafting the story around it, because D&D, all these sorts of things, you're going to hit morally grey. And even if it's not just for D&D, it creates such amazing questions for, the way science, ethics, and magic works. I like it anyway.
Again, in that world, what are the penalties for charming someone?
Yeah.
They're going to be pretty high, because, that's...
It's a violation.
Yeah, psychically manipulating. At the lowest level, it's a violation. And at the highest level, it's you don't want your leaders or officials to be just swayed by whoever comes along with a spell. So, yeah. I imagine it's a pretty big deal in those worlds. What are the real world consequences in our fantasy world? What would they be? And they might be, you're getting arrested for being a criminal. Stop doing crime, people.
Well, there's the writer coming out right there. So I guess we should start winding up. This has been very awesome. I could talk to you about D&D all night. But let's move on to those other bits. So what hobby or interest do you have that's most unrelated to your field of work?
So my field of work, making films about science. I would say probably the least related to that is musical theatre. I'm trying to write a musical at the moment. I could just write a musical about science and then I would join them up, but no, I've got to stop mixing everything with science. So for the moment, musical theatre. It's great. Love musicals.
That's cool. And it's such a different kind of area of your brain to use because, music is entirely different. Do you score it yourself?
No,
No.
I do the chords. I play the chords, blinky blonky chords, and then I sing, and then I give it to an actual musician, and then they make it actually proper and put better chords on too, to be honest.
Yeah. It's all a short of improvement. That's fine. Yeah, that's very cool. I could spend a lot more time talking about that too. Okay. And which childhood book holds the strongest memories for you?
Yeah, you sent me this question in advance, and I was like, "What? You want me to pick? Oh no, this is terrible." But the one thing that I thought, this is interesting. Okay, it is tenuously related to women in STEM. Okay, this is my argument. I read a lot of older fiction with that sort of Victorian or like 30s, 40s, 50s stories. I'm thinking like Enid Blyton. I'm thinking Chronicles of Narnia, and I think they really influenced my sort of understanding of gender and gender roles in a really like both positive and negative way, I would say. Because Enid Blyton in particular has a very strong line of, the girls have to stay home and be safe and the boys get to go out and do adventures. And on the one hand, that did turn me into quite a little mini feminist of like, that's not fair. I want to go and have the adventures. Like, what? This sucks. So that was nice. But on the other hand, there's also, this isn't all Enid Blyton, but I'm thinking something like The Famous Five, where you've got like the tomboy character and then you've got like the girly character. And they're all like the heroes of the book. But for me, it was very much like, oh, no one wants to be girly. Being girly is the worst. That means you don't go anywhere and you want to keep your dress clean and you don't climb things. Like, clearly being a tomboy is the coolest. And it took me a long while to sort of realise the internalized misogyny in that. And I was like, oh no. Oh, I'm a horrible sexist person. Because like, I'm just like, yeah, pink frilly things, that's bad. Being feminine is bad. And I'm like, oh God. Oh no. So, be careful what books you're reading, because it gets in your brain in ways that you don't realise until you're an adult. And then you have to unpack everything that's going on with you.
Absolutely. So it was a funny thing because I love Enid Blyton. I read so much Enid Blyton when I was growing up. And when I had my daughter, I was thinking, Enid Blyton, let's introduce her to that. And I knew that there was going to be stuff there, and I figured we'll talk about that. That's fine, because the way that she is entirely different. And I found 2 copies of the same book, one of them published before 1990 and one published recently. Huh. They have edited it. It is very different now.
Ooh,
they have...
I think that's good.
Yes and no. So they have sanitized quite a bit of the stuff to do with the sexism and the misogyny. And it's now a little bit more neutral.
Oh, gosh.
And I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
I was like, I need to see what they've done with all of these, because so many things have changed. The way, like, there was one where the girls were sent to help the mum do the housework and the boy was sent to go help the dad, and they'd adjusted that. And it's like, fascinating. And they changed the names. Like, obviously, Fanny was changed to Franny because apparently Fanny was a problem, but that's okay.
Fanny's a great name. Poor Fanny. Oh, lucky Fanny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn about that because I feel like, but if you want to like be able to just like give these books to your kids, I think changing them is better because it keeps them usable as their original intent, which is just like stories for children, as opposed to becoming a sort of like, here's a sort of historical insight that we need to then discuss, and that you need that sort of adult input to say like, hey,
let's talk about this.
Was like at the time. This is not. Yeah. I did see some people on Twitter the other day going on about Susan from Chronicles of Narnia as well, which was like such a big thing. Did you read all those ones, like in the last battle at the very end of the series?
I heard about the discussion, but I didn't see it.
Yeah, that really like got to me as well. At the very end of the series, it's all a weird religious analogy, so it's kind of weird. But like Susan, it was very explicitly that she wasn't there because she got into boys and makeup. I'm pretty sure it's just that simple. Is this that she was interested in boys and makeup, and therefore she was kind of like she was an adult, and therefore no longer sort of like believed in Narnia, maybe. But it's also obviously just hugely just like sexuality is evil, which for a Christian analogy, maybe that's not so shocking.
No.
Yeah, but that one as well. It just has it's sending a very clear moral message as to what is good to be interested in.
We can't fight good and evil. Boys are more interesting as well as makeup.
Oh dear, yeah. And yes, just for ages I was like, oh, makeup, that's the devil's work. Well, as an atheist, but still, you know, you can be an atheist and still have these like Christian values ingrained in you from your upbringing, and it's like,
so many things you really do have to unpack, yes.
Yeah, right.
And lastly, what advice would you give someone who would like to do what you do, and what advice should they ignore?
I think my advice is to be really open to sort of different things and opportunities. And I think in ye olden days, you would have a vocation and you'd go into your job and you'd have a clear career path, and that would be your career, your field. It'd be quite limited, just sort of a clear path.
Focused.
Yeah. And I think now, I think it is good not to have too strong an idea of exactly what you want to do, because then you can be more open to different things. You know, like I saw this master's, I was like, oh, maybe I should do that. I thought like, oh, I have some sort of basic filmmaking experience. Maybe that's relevant. You know, I like writing. I read a lot of books when I was little, and I like writing stories. Maybe I can write scripts, or maybe I can write articles.
They're all transferable skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like getting into exactly what I do is really difficult. If I'd set out to do it, I wouldn't have succeeded. But then again, I didn't know that it was an option. And maybe I'd have ended up in some other related thing, which I was like, hey, this is, wow, I never knew this existed, and this is perfect for me. And, you know, that's the alternate timeline me in some other, like, awesome job. I'm very optimistic. All my timeline, I have very awesome jobs. So yeah, I think that's what I'd say. I'd think be open and try different things, try using different things. And also just decide, coming back right to what we talked about right at the beginning, decide whether you want your job that is the one best job in the world, your complete dream role, that is everything, you know, that you have to work towards, and maybe you have to work really hard or really long hours, and, you know, sort of constantly trying to get there. Or like, once you've gotten a bit older, I'm sounding really old again, you know, maybe think about whether what you want is a sort of steady and stable job where you're happy and, you know, you feel like you're good at it and you've got regular hours so you can do your hobbies on the side and you can put your energy there as well. That's a very valid option, I would say.
It is. And I think, yeah, as we get older, it does come up. You start thinking about where you need to head with this and how much you care about what you're doing as your primary income earning activity versus wanting to be able to balance it out and maybe take a job that's less specific to your career so that you can kind of explore other things. Yeah. So good things to reflect on.
Yeah, I think having hobbies is really good. Like, as you know, I have several, as we've discussed. And I really, really value that. That's a really important part of my life. So I don't think I'd want to do a job that was really intense that meant I had no energy for anything else.
Absolutely. Oh, well, yeah, that's amazing. And thank you so much, Shamini, for speaking with me today on SteamPod. It's been absolutely wonderful hearing about your journey.
Thank you, Michelle.
And all your activities, and yeah, just how interested you are in all the stuff that you do at once. It's cool.
It's been great. Yes, thank you so much for asking me and having me on.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure having you. So if people would like to know more about what you do, where can they go?
So, good question. Various social medias. I actually have a website.
Fancy that.
Because of course I do, yes. ShaminiBundell.wordpress.com. There we go. I know my own website. And that has links to my social medias. I am at S Bundell on Twitter and Instagram, and Shamini.b on TikTok. And I would encourage everyone to follow the RPGeeks as well, at RPGeeksDND, if you're at all interested in, you know, science role-playing games. We have fun one-shots as well as an ongoing campaign.
Yeah, everyone should get into D&D. I think it enriches all our lives. Cool. All right, so thank you again, and hope you have an amazing rest of your day.
Have an evening, and I'll have a morning over on the other side of the world.
Absolutely. Thanks. If you enjoyed this conversation, please let me know. Subscribe to this show, leave us a rating, and share this with your geeky or geek-curious friends. You can also support Steam Powered on Patreon under Steam Powered Show, the link for which will also be in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.